What's going on out there? I'm Sean Devine. Hope you all are doing well. Today I'm going to be doing a new tutorial with you all, and we're going to mix a beat from scratch. I get a lot of requests on the channel to do beat mixing specifically. I do have a couple of videos on the channel, but they're more like club, kind of dancey pop sort of tracks that I had mixed in terms of instrumentals in the past. So I wanted to do something that was probably a little closer to the style that a lot of you are producing. It's more hip hop, trappy, 808 heavy kind of track here. So we're going to go ahead and just mix it from top to bottom. You're going to notice that we've got only 8 tracks, so there's not a ton of layers and balancing that we're going to have to deal with. However, I thought this would be a good example because it's going to kind of keep us focused on the essentials and the core of the mix and hopefully be more digestible so we're not trying to get too deep in the session here. But let's go ahead and jump into it. This track or this beat is by Midi Majors. So let's just hear what I've got. This is dry, no mixing or anything done. All right, so you get the idea there. Everything in terms of the recording sounds pretty clean. I'm already hearing a couple of things that we're going to have to fix. There's some noise in some of the files I could just hear in the intro. So let's just see. Yeah, so you can hear just some white noise, some static in a couple of these tracks. Just by soloing, that one's okay. So yeah, some of them just have that white noise static. You might not be able to hear it unless you've got headphones on. But that can happen for a number of reasons. Maybe the producer, these tracks came from an external piece of gear like a machine or something, and the way he had it wired might have produced some noise in some of the recordings. So we're going to get rid of that. Let's go ahead and do that first. So what I'm going to do is, I think it was the snare roll. Let's just check them all real quick. Sounds like it's just the snare roll. Okay, snare roll, hi-hat, and the Vox need to have that noise removed. So let's go to the snare roll. So what I'm going to do is use strip silence to get rid of the points that our signal's not coming in, just these dead spaces with the noise in it. So I'm going to right click, and it's the last thing I use, so it's up there, but it's under the split section of the menu. So we're just going to hit strip silence. And you want to adjust the threshold just to the point where it's going to pick up everything except for those blank spaces. So let's just, I think 1% should be fine. This stuff all looks good. So let's hit OK. And yeah, that should chop it pretty good. Yep, so that works pretty good. Now let's go to, was it the crash? No. Hi-hats. Same thing. I might pull the threshold back a little bit. Let's just try that. Yep, that's cool. And then the Vox, same thing. So we'll hit that. That looks good. All right, so now we're not going to have that noisy signal in the intro. So next thing I want to do, just out of habit, I usually will just run all my instrumental tracks to a bus. Just, usually I'm dealing with vocals as well. So let's just put that onto a bus. So I just selected them, ran it to bus 1, call it beat. So it all go through that fader. So if you did have vocals, you can adjust that. You could solo it while you're mixing the instrumental, whatever you need to do there. It's just handy to have. It's also nice for doing multi-tracks. You've got an aux already set up, then you can just create a bounce of that aux track. So anyways, let's go ahead and let me first just put some metering onto our master, because it's always good to just know where you're at in terms of levels. I typically do RMS. That's kind of my preferred metering. So I just put that on there, and let's just get a feel for where we're at currently. So it's pretty quiet in terms of RMS right now at -21. Our goal is going to be more up here towards like -10, -9. So I'm just going to set that arrow up there. That's our target. Let's see here. So the first thing I want to do is just go ahead and just bring everything down. I'm going to re-level it out just because I want to get a feel for how I'm going to be setting things overall. So we're going to start with the drums here, which is the majority of the tracks. But the kick and the snare are going to be the loudest elements of your beat mix. So we'll go ahead and bring those up first. And since they are kind of quiet, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to select all the tracks, and we're going to adjust the gain up here. You see it's at -6. I'm going to go to 0, just so I've got a little bit more gain. And you may see me peak through this process. Again, as I've shown you in a lot of my videos, my personal approach is to get my level, to get my loudness in the mix, and do just a little bit on the master to keep things in check, to keep me from peaking really heavily. But I'm pushing the faders in the mix pretty hard. This might not be the approach that all of you have, but it works for me. That's at -15, so it's still relatively quiet there. Let's tell you what, we'll boost everything like +3. We'll probably definitely be clipping at this point on the kick. Yeah. But that's more where I want to be in terms of RMS with the kick. Now what I want to do is I'm going to go to our transient section here. I've organized my plugins. If you are curious about how to do that in Logic, you can go up here to your preferences, go to plugin manager, and once you open that, you can create these folders. And I've just organized my plugins so that when I pull things up, it's much easier to figure out where they're at. So let's go to the transient section. I'm going to use the smack attack probably, just to give us a little bit of a front end attack on the kick drum. So what we'll do, as you can see, I'm clipping pretty badly, and a lot of you get really worried about that. I can't hear it. It's not distorting right now. The problem is if you push this too much, when you export it to an MP3 or a lossy format or whatever, then you can introduce some problems. And sometimes your things like SoundCloud, other services like that, they just don't handle clipping and really loud signals as well. So what I usually will do is pick a very transparent master limiter to use on my beat to just kind of mix it into that. And the only thing I'm really doing with it is just keeping things from clipping. So I have a little preset here. You can look on the Pro L. It's just set to transparent. I keep the gain at 0 and the output at 0, and it's strictly just to keep me from clipping the master bus. So I'm still clipping our beat aux. That's okay. Again, I'm not worried about that right now. You can see we're over there. So again, we just added a little bit of front end attack. So this is without it. And the next thing I want to do is use a plugin called the Sausage Fattener. It's kind of a funny little plugin, but it does what it needs to do. It's got a funny animation to it, but yeah, he gets kind of mad when you turn it up. But we're going to add a little bit of fatness to the kick now. So I'm going to bring the kick back now. It's pretty loud. So you can see that this has a little bit of a limiting action here with 0 dB. So we're actually not crossing over and we're not distorting the aux bus, but it's still getting really loud. So this is a useful plugin to really push your drum sounds. And I'm also noticing we've got that noise there. So I'm going to go ahead and do our strip silence on the kick as well. So we still got a little bit of the noise there on the signal. That's okay. I just don't want it going whenever the kick is not coming through there. Now let's go ahead and balance our snare here. And again, if you're looking at our meters, you see that my kick is hitting at our target for the mix. Now the kick and the 808 are going to be your loudest elements. That low end, the low frequency instrumentation or drums in this case, that's going to be the loudest in terms of decibel and RMS in your mix. Now, if you don't have drums, obviously other things could be louder. You may have a kind of more vocal sort of performance, but dealing with hip hop, dealing with urban, dealing with dance, even your kick and your bass information is going to be the loudest. So we're reaching our target of -9 with our kick. So that's just a good place to leave it. -10 might even be safe just to give you a little bit of headroom. So we'll just pull it back just a touch. Now we're going to bring our snare up. So we've got that noise going. I'm starting to notice it on all the channels, so maybe just bringing it up. So you notice when I did that, it pulled some of the reverb that the producer had on the track off of it a little bit. That's okay. I'm going to add my own. I want to add a little bit of a plate reverb to this snare drum. So I'm going to pull up the Valhalla here and we'll pull the mix down. It's going to be pretty quiet. We're going to choose the dirty plate and it's going to be a fast decay and we'll EQ it a little bit. So it's just giving it a little bit of space there. Let's just take a look at the EQ, see what's going on with our snare drum. So we've got some extreme low information in the snare. I don't need that. We don't want that fighting with our other elements here, so I'm just going to roll off everything below 200. That sounds pretty good. Let's go ahead and move on to this snare roll. Let's see what this is all about. Okay, so I can already hear that sounds like there's one extra hit on the roll. Yeah, so it's not very smooth on the end there. So it should just come to about, I guess, right there. I think that's what he intended. So I'm going to put a fade on that. Should be a little smoother. And we'll end up copying these over. I can just do that real quick on these. See what else we got. Yeah, that one's a little more noticeable. And our strip silence, I think it might have clipped a little bit of the signal off on some of these, but that's okay. You guys get the idea. Be careful with the strip silence. You don't want to remove too much of your signal. I think this is the last one here. I don't want to bore y'all too much with this. Okay. No, we got quite a few. So I'm just going to copy these over and save y'all from having to watch this. Make sure I'm putting it in the right place. So I've copied our nice clean fades onto all of our snare drums there, and the balance of that. Let's go ahead and put a little bit of a reverb on that too. So I just duplicated the Valhalla over to it. Gives it a little bit more of a matching space to our snare drum. And you can hear that it's already panning, but I think it might be cool to add a little tremolo, or is it called the tremolator in Logic? I'm not sure. Let's see. Modulation, tremolo. Yeah, tremolo effect. I'm going to pull that up, and this might give us an interesting. We need the rate to be faster. Let's try 16th. We'll turn the depth down. So that's just going to give us a panning effect if I play it without it. Just exaggerates it a little bit. It sounds like maybe he already had some tremolo on it, but at least now you all know that's how you can kind of achieve that panning effect. So let's move on to the hi-hats. So a lot of you have questions about where to put the hi-hat in the mix. You know, should you pan it left or right, subtly? And I generally like to leave the hi-hat in the middle, but what I do is put a sample delay on it. So what this will do is just give you a little bit of a spread. This is actually called the Haas Effect, if I'm not mistaken, if you want to put a name on it. But you just leave one side to 0, and then you would pick something really small for the Haas Effect, like less than 40, I think, but I tend to do it just a little bit more. You don't want to get crazy with it because you'll introduce some phasing issues, but let's try something subtle first. Let me solo this. So that's just it at 0 dead center. Now if we move this slowly, you notice it starts to spread the hi-hat out across the left and right channels a little bit. So that's just going to be a good effect. And this way the hi-hat stands out, but it's not distracting. The thing that I always say about panning, when you're mixing, think of it like you're directing the listener's attention. So if we pan to one side this hi-hat too heavily, like this, where our kick and our snare should be the focal point, I'm hearing that hi-hat, it's standing out to me because it's pan wide left, and it's like, why am I paying attention to that? So we don't want to do that. We want it to be nice and crisp and have some width to it, but so with the hi-hat, general rule is you want it to sit just behind the kick and the snare in terms of level. Now, obviously, the hi-hat has got a lot more high frequency information going on, so it's going to kind of sit in its own space in terms of the spectrum. But as far as balance and level, you want to tuck it in just behind the kick and the snare. terms of brightness, I'm going to leave it. We don't need to EQ anything. There's nothing low going on, but obviously with a hi-hat, you can roll off pretty much anything below 500 or so. So let's bring in this crash cymbal. Where's that? So this is panning a little bit from left to right. And again, I just want this to kind of accentuate the groove. So I'm not going to, wide pan it or anything. We'll probably just leave this to the center and let the panning that the producer's already got on it, just leave it as is. So it just kind of adds a texture. It's not really necessarily a heavy percussive crash, which is fine. But we'll leave that there. Now, the other thing that I noticed, let's move on to the 808. I heard that a couple of the notes are actually out of key. It didn't sound quite right to me. So we're going to have to do some doctoring on that. Let's just pull the fader up, get the level about right on the 808, and I'll show you what I'm talking about. So that note, I mean, it hits okay. It just doesn't sound quite right in terms of the pitch. These are okay. Now you'll hear, let me just turn the sample up just a little bit so you can hear the music and hear the key of it. So that note just doesn't quite sound right with the music and the key, the scale of the beat. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy those notes. So we'll just cut those, and I'm going to duplicate the track, and we'll just drag those down. Okay, so now that I've got those, let's just call this 808 tuned. And I'm going to pull up a pitch shifter. I found that just the best sounding pitch shifter in my experience is this sound shifter from Waves. So we'll put that on there, and then I'm just going to listen and kind of figure out. I'm going to solo the sample, which is the music element, and the 808, and then we're going to figure out where we need to be. So I think it sounds a little low. Let's go up. I think that's got it. So it's up 2 semitones. Let's solo them one more time. Let's see. So in terms of the music, again, that just fits. It sits better for me with it pitched up like that. So let me just go ahead and we'll go to our other verse parts, and we can just copy those over. We'll just select these, copy, and copy. Now I'm going to show you, once we've got these copied over, just to make it easier for ourselves, we can actually just bounce these to one track. So I'll just select them, and then I'm just going to bounce in place so that we can get rid of the sound shifter. So we'll just mute the source. I'm going to hit OK. and that's just going to bounce our now tuned 808. And we're waiting. Okay, so it muted. Let's see. This is our new one up here. And then our original one should be muted. So now that these are muted, I'm just going to hide them. I'm going to click H on these. Hide. Now we have our new 808, and it should be tuned the way we had it. Yep. All right, so now we're going to do a little bit of work in terms of the mix on the 808. Balance-wise, that sounds pretty good, but what I want to do is create a side chain with our kick here. So I'm just going to do a send, and we'll send to a new bus. Let's just send to bus 32. I generally like to create my side chain on a high number bus, just so that it's not confusing me with our other aux tracks. But anyway, let's just call this kick SC. Now with the sidechain, what you want to do is set your output to no output, because we're just using this as a trigger that's going to trigger the compressor on the 808, which is going to give us a duck every time the kick hits. So I'm going to go ahead and open up just the stock compressor in Logic. And again, I've talked about this, but I've found that this Studio FET compressor color or style in Logic works really good for the sidechain. So then I'm going to go and select our sidechain input as bus 32. And then now we can adjust our compression here. So I'm going to solo the kick in 808. So let's turn off the auto gain. I'm going to adjust our makeup. So you can just adjust the threshold and the ratio. What you're looking for in the meter is to have, you know, at least -5, at least 5 decibels of compression there. You may want to go even heavier than that, but I just want to give it just enough space to where our kick pokes through, and the sub and the kick, or the 808 and the kick, aren't fighting with each other. So you can see our gain reduction up here. And you can adjust your release time. Actually like it pretty fast release, 110. So that sounds about right there. Let's check our meter. The 808 can be really tricky because obviously it's low. Sometimes it's harder to hear. I mean, right now, just being on my headphones, it's a little harder to reference. So you want to just check and make sure that your 808 isn't pushing your levels too much. That's kind of the first thing that can lead you into distortion territory. So we just want to make sure that everything is okay there. Obviously, I'm running into the master limiter, which isn't going to let us go above 0, but we can still change the sound of the mix. Like I was talking about at the beginning, at this point, the master limiter is really just a transparent processing plugin that's just keeping us from clipping. We don't want it changing the sound, so we can still push that too hard and distort our mix. So the peak is going a little bit over. That's okay. Again, we're running into the master limiter. But in terms of RMS, let's just see where the 808 by itself is. So it's a couple dB behind the kick. This is a personal preference. Some mixes, your 808 or your sub bass may be louder than the kick. I personally like the kick to be really punchy and really impactful, and have the 808 kind of be the glue and the supporting low end for the kick. But overall, that sounds pretty good. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate our 808 track, and we're going to add a little bit of saturation, some subtle distortion to the 808 to give it a little bit of a nice kind of sound for low end, or excuse me, for hi-fi systems. And we're also going to add a spread to it. And don't let that confuse you. I'm going to show you how that works. It's just a simple thing of flipping the phase. But let's just go ahead and say 808 enhancer, and I'm going to pull down the exact copy of our 808. And what I'm going to do on this track is I'm just going to remove all the low frequency information, say below like 300 or 400, steep roll off, and then we're going to heavily distort this. So I'm going to turn it down, but let's go ahead, and you'll notice that it copied over our compressor, so we should still have the sidechain. That's great. And then we're going to go ahead and go to just the stock distortion in Logic. And we're going to heavily compress it. I'm going to turn the tone up, and we'll turn the output down. So we can see so we had to pull it back just to catch. There's not a lot of high frequency information in this 808. So I'm just going to pull the EQ back just a little bit so that we can feed that to the distortion. Now, the last thing we're going to do is I'm going to add a gain plugin. So we go to Logic, Utility, Gain, and we're just going to flip the phase on one side, and watch what this does. So we get kind of a pseudo stereo effect versus just being dead center. So what this is going to do is, as long as your listener is in stereo, they're going to hear this element mixed in behind the 808, which we're going to do in just a minute. But if they're in mono, what will happen is it will just cancel itself out. So if I hit mono, so if we run mono playback, the phase will just cancel each other out. So it just won't be there. This is for your stereo listeners. This is a stereo enhancement. So I should call this stereo enhancer. But we're going to mix this very subtly underneath the 808. So that's with as without. So it just gives us a little bit more width, a little bit of flavor for the 808 there. So now moving on to the sample itself, let's just see. I want to level this out a little bit better. So with something like this, with instrumentation, this is kind of a feel type of thing. You don't want it to be too loud, because then the impact of our drums will get kind of drowned, and then it's going to be tough to mix in vocals when your instrumentation is too loud. So it's really an experience type of thing, but let me just show you if it's too loud. you tried to mix vocals on top of that, it's going to be very difficult, and we just lose the impact and the presence of the drums. So we need to bring it back. So that feels about right in terms of level. Now let me pull up an EQ here. Let's see what's going on. So let's roll off any of this low end stuff. So I want to add a little bit of width to this, just kind of wrap it around the drums. So let's try maybe Waves, the Vitamin plugin, just to kind of give us some width, and I may accentuate some of these frequencies. So if you're not familiar with Vitamin, down here are your width controls. It's a multi-band processing enhancer. You can create different width kind of settings for different bands, and then you can also boost certain bands, give it kind of an exciter sort of effect. So we're gonna just kind of boost and widen some of the highs and the high mids. So you'll notice that little bass line in the sample, by lowering down here in this low mid section at like 500, gave us a really cool kind of width on that. I'll solo it for you. Let's go over here. So if I bypass it, and then with it, so this is without Vitamin. And with. So it just kind of wraps the sample and the instrumentation around the drums a little bit. Gives us a nice separation there. It is a little bit much right now, so I'm just going to go over to the width master. I'm going to just turn that all back just a touch. All right, so last element here, we've got a little Vox track, so I'm just going to level it first. So we've got some left to right panning already going on. And we'll just roll off the lows. All right, y'all, so that sounds pretty good. We've got a nice balance there. The drums are very impactful, hitting pretty hard. Now, if you're mixing into a master limiter like that, like I'm doing, and you want to, balance your tracks out for an artist to be able to perform to it and then have it mixed later, all you would need to do is just turn off the master limiter and bring all of your faders down just a little bit so that you're not clipping. You can send that to your mastering engineer, and they're going to be able to do what they need to do with it. But in terms of just creating a mix for the beat that you're going to be able to, hopefully have artists do songs with the 2-track. This is a great way to, again, just kind of give you that master level and that loudness you want, but keep you in check throughout the mixing process. And again, with my personal approach, and this just seems to work for me, is to try to achieve your loudness in the mixing stage, not relying so much on a master limiter or a master compressor, multi-band compressor. That type of stuff will drastically change the transients and the dynamics of your drums and of your beat. So this is a better method to give you a more transparent kind of control over the loudness and the master sound. All right, y'all, so we just mixed a beat from scratch, showed you a lot of different processes and techniques that I use in most of my instrumentation and production. So I hope you find these things helpful. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them below. If you learned anything in this video, please like and subscribe, and we'll talk to you soon.